This game between Tennessee and Georgia is dripping with playoff stakes and SEC title hopes, and it's really a big one anytime these two former SEC East foes meet. It's round 54 with Georgia winning 7 straight against the Vols. And here to help us break down this massive game, we've got Patrick Brown from GoVols 24/7 and Jordan Hill from Dogs 24/7. Talking matchups here, guys. Let's start with the Tennessee offense versus the Georgia defense. And, of course, the status of Nico Iamaleava has been up in the air all week long. But, Patrick, no matter who is playing quarterback, what should the offensive strategy be for the Vols against Georgia?
Yeah, Emily, this is a different Tennessee offense compared to the one that went to Athens 2 years ago with Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and all those big plays. And that was the top scoring offense in the country. This offense has been far from that. I think they're still top 10 in total offense and top 15 nationally in scoring. But in play, those numbers have been a little bit down. The numbers that haven't been down are for Dylan Sampson. The running back is the leading rusher in the SEC. He's got 20 touchdowns this season. And regardless of if Nico Iamaleava is playing or not, Tennessee is going to continue to ride this run game that Sampson has been leading the charge of all season. He's been sort of the workhorse, the bell cow for this offense. He averaged 25 carries per game in the first 5 SEC games, and he got 30 last week against Mississippi State, even though he looked like at one point he was banged up pretty good. So he's fighting through it. That offseason work on his durability has paid off so far, as he's over 200 carries for the season already. The offensive line has been physical at points, and Tennessee now has an identity where they can line up with 2 tight ends and kind of run it at teams. So whoever's at quarterback, that's going to be probably the game plan. That's sort of been the blueprint that Tennessee has followed all season. And if Tennessee's going to win this game, they need Sampson to play well. He's got, I think, 8 100-yard games in 9 games this season. So he's been the guy, and he's got to continue to be the guy for Tennessee in this game.
I think Georgia understands stopping Tennessee on Saturday is going to come down to stopping that run game. And Dylan Sampson was a guy that Kirby Smart raved about earlier in the week, compared him to Alvin Kamara with his skill set and just how tough he is running the football and taking carry after carry. And then you factor in the questions at quarterback. They may have to lean on him even more than they have to this point. I mean, this is going to be a huge test for the Georgia defensive line. I think they're coming off a really underwhelming performance against Ole Miss. And we're looking at the defensive line, both in pass rush and stopping the run. Did a pretty good job stopping the run against Ole Miss, but just wasn't very effective in getting to Jackson Dart. Started the game great and sort of set Georgia up very well, getting a lot of pressure, forcing an interception on Ole Miss's first drive. And then after that, it just sort of felt like the defensive line was held in check. And you look at the 28-10 loss, you look at this defense understanding the stakes, understanding that this is going to be a game that Georgia can't afford to lose if it wants to make the 12-team playoff. They got to stuff the run. They got to get after whichever Tennessee quarterback is out there, and they got to make their presence felt early and often.
On the other side, Georgia offense versus the Tennessee defense. Definitely some injuries for the Dogs on offense, too, specifically on that offensive line. So how do they adjust around those questions?
I think it's going to be the million-dollar question going into Saturday. This is an offense that frankly looked a little lost in Oxford. Only 10 points. That's tied for the fewest in any game of the Kirby Smart era. 245 yards of total offense, the fewest since 2017, a loss at Auburn. It's a situation where Georgia's going to have to find answers and quickly, and it's not going to be easy because of the injury situation that Emily mentioned. This offensive line across the board is banged up. We learned early in the week that Cash Jones, one of the running backs that is not a starter but plays a pretty good bit, is often in on pass plays. He's dealing with a foot injury. This is a team that is playing a very good Tennessee team at a point in the season where it is hurting, and it needs to find answers quickly. I think the big key for this Georgia offense is just to protect Carson Beck. It got into a situation against Ole Miss where it had to rely on screens. They just understood they couldn't protect Carson Beck long enough to have plays develop downfield. And now we're talking about a Tennessee defensive front that's been really good at stopping the run and has been very effective rushing the passer. So this is a huge test. I think that Stacey Searles is going to make his money, Georgia's offensive line coach. He's got a tough situation on his hands. But if Georgia wants to win this game, this offensive line probably has to have its best game of the entire season.
Yeah, Jordan, I think if you're Tennessee's defensive line, you probably watched the film of the Ole Miss game and probably felt pretty encouraged. Tennessee's defensive line has a lot of ability up front. They've been very disruptive for pretty much all season. They've controlled some games, and you look at this Tennessee defense that's held every single opponent under 20 points this season. It's because of that defensive line. They've been very good against the run. Now they've given up season highs in rushing yards each of the past 2 weeks against Kentucky and then last week against Mississippi State. So that's maybe an area where they need to shore that up. But this defensive line has been disruptive. I think they had 4 sacks and 9 tackles for loss last week. They're doing a good job of making negative plays and getting teams behind the sticks. And I think the other two parts of the defense are also feeding off of that. Another thing that Tennessee's defense has done really well as of late is forced turnovers. They had a couple more last week against Mississippi State. I think they're up to 9 over the last 4 games. I think they've gotten multiple turnovers in each of their SEC wins so far this season. So they're finding ways to take the football away, and whether it's fumbles and interceptions, and obviously Georgia has had its issues with the turnovers. And the other thing Tennessee's defense is doing really well is getting off the field. I think they're second in the country in third down defense. They're getting off the field at a really good clip on third and fourth down, really. So when they're able to do all of those things and generate disruption and takeaways and get off the field on third down, they're a really tough defense to score against. And that's why they've only allowed, I think, 12 points a game this season. So if they can continue those trends and win the line of scrimmage, I think this is a big game for the defensive line to set the tone early. And I think Tennessee has a chance to keep this game well within reach, regardless of whatever state the offense is in.
All right, finally, guys, we simulated this game 20 times on EA College Football 25, the video game, and Georgia won it 12 of those times. So for each team, let's start with Jordan real quick. What's the biggest key to pulling out a win in the real game?
I think, again, it just goes back to this offensive line. They have got to protect, because this has been an offensive line that just has struggled throughout the season. The run game has not been there. Carson Beck, has struggled as well, and they're coming off of getting their butt whipped, to be quite honest, in that loss at Ole Miss. So I think it all stems on if the offensive line can hold up. I think we may see some new faces on this line just because of the injury situations. It all starts up front. I think Georgia's defense is up for the challenge, that they can keep Tennessee's offense in check enough to make this a game. But, in that Ole Miss game, the defense held and held. I think they forced 5 field goals. Eventually, you need help on the other side. I think it starts up front for the Georgia offensive line.
I think for Tennessee, Jordan, they just got to stick to the blueprint that's worked all season. That's Dylan Sampson, and that's defense. I think another thing for Tennessee is this has got to be a mindset game. They went to Athens a couple of years ago, ranked number 1, unbeaten, and they kind of got overwhelmed that day by I think the stage of the magnitude of that game got to them, as did a deafening crowd at Sanford Stadium, and a really hungry group of Georgia Bulldogs on the other side sort of overwhelmed Tennessee and kind of showed Tennessee what it looks like to be a championship team of a program. Stakes are still pretty high at this one, but obviously this is a big chance, a program changing opportunity for Tennessee. So can they handle a night game on the road? They've been a little skittish on the road under Josh Heupel, but this is obviously a big breakthrough opportunity for the Vols.
Defense and run game, a hallmark of every Josh Heupel team. It's a strange season, but looking forward to this game. Thank you guys both so much for the great breakdowns. Keep track of all things Tennessee with GoVols 24/7 and Dogs 24/7 for everything you need to know about Georgia.